Now that we've finished emerging adulthood, our next
If you're ready,
concept, of
let's
course,
now start
we're
Module
ready to go
10,
to the chapter
Early
module
Adulthood,
referred to either as
also called Young Adulthood,
or early
though your
adulthood.
text does
I'll
use the term early adulthood.
interchangeably because
Totally
they are in the
interchangeable.
industry.
The
In
discretion of
terms
the
of
author.
definition, now that we have
Now,
the
the last
concept
time I
of
taught
emerging
this,
adults,
emergent adulthood was a
the
concept,
beginning
not a
time has been
module.
tweaked since the last
So
time I
we
taught
went
this
right from
course.
adolescence to
Last time I
young adulthood.
taught it, emerging adult was just a concept.
But now
a
young
module.
adulthood is become a full
So last
module,
time
and I
taught
think
it
that's
was
an excellent
20 to
idea
25
personally.
to 40 or 45.
We're going to define the age group
Emerging adulthood,
for this
we'll
particular
say
stage
25
as 25
either
to,
40 or even
and what are you
45.
thinking?
And this
30,
is in no small part to
35,
how much longer
35,
we lived than,
40.
say, 1900.
It might surprise you to know that we're going to define it in the standard way, 25 to 40 or even 45. Now, 45 surprises you. A person is 44 and a half as a young adult. Well, consider that in the year 1900, 50 was the average lifespan. Half of people made it, half of people didn't. But we now live considerably longer, though that has been declining in the last year or two for some groups. But in any case, we'll go to 25 to 40 or 45. There is a hint for the Erikson questions that might appear. Ignore the 45 and 40 to 45 part of it because that'll make it not coincide nicely and neatly with Erikson as it used to. So for just in the case of Erikson, ignore those last few years. That'll make your life easier.
Let's now consider the family life cycle. Please note that stress is typically the greatest during transitions between phases. For every bullet point below, insert the idea of perhaps parenthood, perhaps retirement, and so on. In terms of the bullet points that should be there for emerging adulthood, well, since we just finished that chapter, go ahead and in your notes, I hope you're taking notes, in your notes, go ahead and put some of the major facets. So in terms of early adulthood, or in other words, young adulthoods, finding a long, or I'll say longer term job. Probably the job that you did in emerging adulthood was stewards, the supermarket, whatever, which is fine if you want that to be your permanent job, but many people who are going for advanced education, that's just a temporary step to finance their living. So finding that job that's hopefully in your career area and never moving up that ladder, or finding a good place to stay. Finding a partner, if that's your interest. Cohabitation, very common. Commitment to that person, or I should say persons, because there are polyamorous persons. So parenthood, big choice. Not everybody says yes. Some people say yes by happenstance. Middle adulthood, launching your children if you had them. Preparing for retirement. The earlier you start, the more money you'll have saved. So saving $25 a week, $20 a week when you're in your 20s will make a much bigger effect than saving 3 or 4 or 5 times that in your 50s. A late adulthood, retirement, but again, not everybody can afford to retire. Aging, if you survive, that will be inevitable. Death of the partner or spouse, if you had one. And of course, in late adulthood, often a certain degree of physical and sometimes mental decline. So hopefully tertiary education or post-secondary education was high in your list of emerging adulthood. And I'm always surprised when students don't list that, or when I talk about self-concept in intro psych, when asked to jot down everything that describes you, that's essential to you, that's near and dear to you, so many people don't list being a college student, which is probably your central focus, or at least one of the top 2 or 3 when you're in college. But anyhow, developing an identity, the values, the goals, the who am I, what do I believe in, what do I not believe in, what do I want for myself, etc., etc. Often mark instability in dwellings. We said the greatest number of residence changes will occur during this time period. Also, typically the greatest degree of job changing. Also, the greatest degree of, often year for year, relationship fluctuation. A time of great freedom and exploration for many, but not all, most. If you had a child maybe in high school, this might be a very different path for you, and so on. If you're a member of a particular religious group or ethnicity that has strong feelings in these areas, that can also have a huge impact as well.
As you probably know, the health in America is lower than any similar nation. Take a moment and, if you will, think of how many possible causes of this that you can identify.
Let's start our discussion of this topic by noting that America spends more than any other nation in healthcare. So are we then healthier than any other nation or even most nations? That's a good question.
There are many factors involved. First of all, lack of universal health care. The United States spends more on health care than any other nation, and yet millions and millions of Americans are not covered. Perhaps you're one of them. This lack of universal health care impacts children. Children in the U.S. have poorer health care and poorer health than children of similar nations, and the sickly child becomes the sickly adolescent and the at-risk adult. Poverty takes its toll on our health in many ways. Also, in America, compared to many nations, we have higher levels of substance abuse and higher levels of violence, both in the home, at the school, and outside of the home.
We also have to consider systemic racism and the other isms, genderism, sexual orientation-ism, ableism, ageism, and many, many so-ons. It can be done by the individuals. So if you go to rent an apartment and they see your race, ethnicity, your religion, perhaps they don't rent to you specifically because of it. It might occur in the job situation. It might affect your experience in a store or shopping. Those are often individual acts of racism. But we also need to be aware of systemic racism at the level of institutions. Take a minute and think of these institutions, these many institutions that I'm referring to. So let's consider how many of these examples of systemic racism you thought of, and perhaps you thought of a few I didn't, in terms of hiring, in terms of promotion and salaries, housing and bank loans, education, environment and health. Usually the things like waste facilities, plants that produce toxins or pollute the air are usually not in the wealthy person section. Legal treatment, protection by the police, obviously related, criminal conviction. I pulled out two interesting, hopefully interesting bar graphs on the right comparing salary by race and gender and home ownership by race. I was introduced to the concept of the seven-headed hydra a few years ago at a DEI conference. I hope you know what DEI stands for. Take a moment and make sure that you do. So let's consider the heads of the hydra. Patriarchy, male privilege over females, even to the point of controlling their bodies. Big issue right now. In one particular state, if a woman was pregnant and her the fetus was non-viable and was going to die, and it was at risk of even her life, there are attempts to force her to continue. The one woman I'm referring to had to actually leave the state to enable to save her life. So male decision-making over females. Race/ethnicity, that's probably what we think of first and foremost. Colonialism and paternalism. that white Western culture has privilege over non-white, non-Western cultures and can control their destinies, can guide them like a fatherly, benevolent figure or as a despot. Hetero or cisnormity, that we look at people from a heterosexual point of view, that it's what we all assume and what we expect everybody should fit into. A class privilege, middle and upper class against people of lower classes. Ableism, whether it's physical, mental, intellectual. I would take in physical issues, intellectual issues, mental health issues. Ageism, that if you're old, you are less capable and need to be guided and often just not seen. A lot of these individuals are just plain not seen and not considered. Now, many of us do face the isms being members of one or more of these categories, and if not, if you live, you will enter the ageism and quite possibly the ableism category. You should also remember the concept of intersectionality, or learn the concept of intersectionality, multiple identities in which the person may be disenfranchised. For example, maybe a woman of color, she's both going through life facing the issues and the isms, the discrimination and differential treatment of being a woman and also as being a black woman. What if she's a black woman who is Muslim? Now we add another layer onto it. What if she's a black woman and she is gender fluid or gender conforming and so on? So each layer that we add on complicates that person's life, and instead of having to face the typical demands of life, they get to face all these other additional challenges and difficulties and differential treatment and discrimination. It wears on the body, it wears on the mind.
Our peak development is actually in the early 20s, and virtually all body systems will begin their decline in young or early adulthood. But why? I'm asking you to take a moment and think of as many body systems as you can and think why they're declining, and in general think, why do people decline with age?
You may never consider this. If you live long enough, you will age. It's inevitable, it's unavoidable, so you might have never questioned it. But there are specific reasons why we age, and some people more sooner and more severely than others. So see if you can think of any of these.
Let's look at the various explanations for why we age. In no small doubt, no small part, aging is a result of all these factors. Some body systems are affected by some of these more than others, but they all play a role. Let's start with hormonal changes. As we age, most of our hormonal systems, most of our endocrine glands, decrease their hormones, and this will affect our physical and even psychological functioning in negative ways. For example, if you consider sex hormones, estrogen, progesterone for women, testosterone for cis men, their decline will have noticeable effects. Both sexes will see a drop in fertility. Women in particular, as I teach in my human sexuality class, due to the lower levels of these hormones, particularly estrogen, will find differences in their sexual anatomy, the vulva and vagina. But overall, probably the biggest effect of our functioning due to hormonal changes would be growth hormone. I could foresee someday in the future the possibility of growth hormone supplements. Let's consider heredity. We all have genes that are sometimes called aging genes. They influence our lifespan and life expectancy. They determine how many divisions our cells get. There's considerable individual variation, as well as variation in particular groups. You'll consider dogs in a future slide in the course. great variation in the life expectancy of various dog breeds. Mutations can also affect our ability to survive and age. Cells that have mutations, basically bad copies, will no longer effectively do their function, and indeed, with the case of cancer, the mutation can be imminently life-threatening. No small part of aging is that telomeres shorten. If you're not familiar with telomeres, that's perfectly fine. Look at the picture of the chromosome in the upper left of the slide. You see the red end caps on the chromosome. Those are telomeres. They protect the chromosome. At a point where they are no longer able to function, they are not protecting the chromosome anymore and will influence its ability to continue to do its job and to continue to divide if that cell divides. Sometimes telomeres are referred to as our aging clock. You can see the picture of the clock I put in the upper right. Environmental damage can also play a role. It includes damage from sun, toxins in the air, toxins in the water, toxins in our food and other sources, and unhealthy living choices, whether it might be high-fat diets, the chemicals in what we eat, what we smoke, various factors that sometimes can be avoided. The wear and tear theory suggests that the body part, just after years and years and decades of use, wears out. Consider our hearing, for example. The parts of our ear that are supposed to vibrate, for example, our eardrum and ear bones, when they wear out, they do not vibrate as well, and we do not hear as well. Or maybe you know somebody that's had a hip replacement, again, probably due to wear and tear. Aging also results from changes in our immune system, both over and underactive. An overactive immune system means autoimmune disease. They can be life-threatening, such as anemias. Some autoimmune diseases attack the thyroid. Other autoimmune diseases result in such issues as arthritis. An underactive immune system does not do its job, hence, given the recent coronavirus situation, the elderly are at higher risk because their immune systems are no longer acting as effectively as ours. Underactive can also play a significant role in cancer. When a cell goes cancerous, it's the immune system that searches out the cell and tries to destroy it. The younger body is much more effective in finding these cells and eliminating them. The last one we'll talk about is cross-linkage. This refers to proteins in the cell. Instead of staying in the compounds that they're supposed to be in, they bind to other materials. When this happens, the cell can no longer function properly. A common result is loss of elasticity. For example, the skin begins to sag. Also particularly affected would be the skin. So consider the hand on the bottom right with age spots. Or consider the lens of the eye stiffens so that vision changes occur. As we age, virtually everybody acquires glasses. Or consider the clouding of the lens, cataracts. Again, these are all due to cross-linkage. So in the previous slide, we've considered reasons for why we age. That might lead you to the question, well, how can I slow the aging? Or to use our fancy term, how can I slow my cell senescence? One of the most powerful tools that we can use is consistently engaging in high levels of physical activity. One particular study from the University of California at San Francisco found that this could increase one's life span by about 9 full years on average. Other researched tools that can slow senescence would be having a significantly greater amounts of vegetables in your diet, stress management and increased social support, lower levels of drug use. These would be particularly effective in also helping us cope to the current COVID environment. The last one is not necessarily what you eat, but how you eat it. There's a lot of newer research suggesting Our traditional 3 meals a day plus snacks is a quotation here from the National Institute on Aging, is a major cause of cell stress involved in cell aging. It's been suggested by many medical researchers that the use of intermittent fasting, which means abstaining from eating for 16 hours a day and then just eat in the other remaining 8 hours. Previous research has suggested that eating total fewer calories overall and smaller meals also helps. I've known that there's quite a bit of older research suggesting that rodents, rats, kept on diets that were not anorexic but close to it, live years longer than their colleagues that were fed normal meals. So these are some of the physical steps you can take, and if you're not willing to take all, that's fine, but if you are interested in just slowing your senescence, pick even one, and then another year, maybe pick another one. Hope that's helpful.
As new information comes in, I update these slides, and the newest bullet I've added is limit your consumption of highly processed foods. This is a really hot topic both in lay areas and medical journals. It's associated with premature aging. People that are heavy into highly processed foods have brain functioning about 1.5 years older than their brain and their body actually is. It's also a harbinger and increases your odds greatly of neurocognitive issues that we'll talk about later in the course. So, and interestingly, this is one of the few areas in which the current head of the government in terms of the medical area, Dr. Kennedy, is in full agreement with the medical community, and this is one of the very few areas that this is true. So strong support on all sides of the fence politically that highly processed foods are very, very bad. You might wonder, how can you tell? Well, if it's something your grandmother could cook or you could cook, it's not highly processed. It lists a lot of things that are chemicals, things that you don't have in your cupboards, probably highly processed. Let me give you an example in one moment. Last year I bought Stewart's Pizza a lot. At the end of the day, when I'm working outside, it's easy, it's pretty affordable, highly processed. I've almost eliminated that this year. I had like maybe 2 times. They were gifts from friends that I felt they had to accept. Consider the Bibigo, B-I-B-I-G-O brand of pot stickers, basically the dumplings that you might get in a Chinese restaurant before the meal. The bag I'm looking at was somewhere in the $7 range. It has 30 to 36. In terms of the ingredients, it has chicken, cabbage, onion, soy sauce, sesame oil. Under the dough, it's enriched wheat flour, which has barley, wheat, niacin, and thiamine. That's this vitamin B, riboflavin, vitamin B, folic acid, vitamin B. So if you take a vitamin, that's what you're getting. And vegetable oil and salt. That's it. So things that are all in your house and usable. So, and it doesn't have to be all or none. If you have something bad in your diet, cut it back by once every 2 weeks, then once a week, then maybe eventually for just special occasions. You can do it and your brain will thank you.
Let's examine how our different bodily systems function in young adulthood. Starting with heart. High blood pressure and high cholesterol damage the heart and are a warning sign for future problems. Currently, we are seeing high blood pressure and high cholesterol even in children. Motor performance peaks in young adulthood. It's not surprising. Most Olympic athletes are young. Most professional athletes retire prior to age 35 or 30, depending on the sport. Certain exceptions, of course, such as golf and bowling and the like. Lung capacity will decrease after 25, in no small part because the connective tissues stiffen, making breathing harder and less effective. The immune system will also decline early related to a shrinking thymus. If you not sure where the thymus is found in the body, you can see the picture on the bottom right. Infertility also decreases, so individuals who delay child rearing for career do have to face the possibility that the longer they delay, it will substantially decrease their ability and likelihood of conceiving children. Males, it's a gradual decline. For females, it jumps. For both sexes, the changes start to happen at about age 35.
So, did you figure out what that picture was showing? As you might want to assume correctly, it has something to do with the slide. It would be the thymus gland.
Let's consider obesity in young adulthood. Currently, just over 1/3 of Americans are obese, and many more are overweight. The newest research is yielding some surprising results. Individuals who are obese in their 20s are expected to live about 10 years less. Now, I'm sure you know that obesity is associated with heart disease, stroke, diabetes, but you also know that obese individuals have a significantly higher rate of some cancers. We've considered the physical consequences of obesity, but what about the social consequences? People who are obese have greater difficulty in finding partners, in finding jobs, and housing. Discrimination, of course, is illegal, but nonetheless, it does occur. Obese individuals are often mistreated by society, but also within the family. I pose the question, is obesity the last socially sanctioned prejudice? Now let's consider tobacco use. Of course, it falls within the category of alcohol and other drugs. At this point, smoking is down markedly in our culture and country, down to 17%. But unfortunately, the use of other tobacco products, such as vaping, is increasing dramatically. And I'm sure you're all well of the recent lung injuries and even deaths caused by vaping products. Most smokers start prior to adulthood, somewhere in middle teens. If you consider our smokers, 1 out of 3 will die directly from smoking-related diseases. The ones who don't die will still typically suffer from smoking-related illness. So if you have a smoker in your life, there's a little ammo. And if you're a smoker thinking about cessation products, I think that's a great idea, but until matters clear, I would stay far from vaping. Tobacco is considered to be the leading cause of preventable death in our country. Interestingly, let's look at personality in terms of tobacco use. You might have an intro psych in the personality chapter looked at the Big Five trait theory. It's interesting that when we study tobacco users, specifically smokers, we find negative changes in all 5 areas of those personality traits, but none in the non-smokers. I don't know when you took intro psych, but try to think back. Did your teacher teach you the ocean mnemonic? Can you try to remember the Big 5 personality traits? They could appear on your quiz. So think of the mnemonic ocean. So now the answer. O is for openness. Openness to ideas or experiences? Openness to new experiences. The C, was that consciousness or conscientiousness? It was conscientiousness. Think of that as dependability, perhaps. And I admit totally, conscientiousness is a difficult word to spell. I've learned it, but I should by this point. It's on the next slide for you. So we got OCE. E is for the dimension of extroversion dash introversion. A, was that aggression or agreeableness? It was agreeableness. And N, that's a toughie. Narcissism or neuroticism? It would be neuroticism, basically referring to emotional stability. If you're highly neurotic, you're not stable. If you're low in narcissism, which I hope you are high in stability. So again, neuroticism refers to level of emotional stability. We noted that our peak development is in the early 20s, but it can be a very risky time too. Please take a moment and see if you can identify the top 5 leading causes of death for people in young or early adulthood. Humor your teacher. Go ahead and do it, please. The previous slide asked you to identify as many possible causes of death, major causes of death that is, that you could identify. How many of these made your list? Perhaps cancer and heart disease didn't because you're focusing on 20-year-olds, but please remember that young adult or early adulthood also encompasses 30 and 45-year-olds, perhaps as well. Next, I'd like to ask you to put these in order from 1 through 6. Before I give you the answer, could you take a moment and decide which is the leading cause of death for all Americans? If you said heart disease, you are correct. Now for the ordering, if you take the first cause of my list, alcohol and other drugs, and switch it with accidents, that is, making accidents first and alcohol and other drugs fourth, you now have the correct order. Lastly, before we leave the slide, I'd like to ask you for each one, with the exception of accidents, to guess whether it's going up or down in terms of its risk and prevalence since, say, the beginning of this millennium, the year 2000. After you've made your decision, please click the last icon. Let's see how you did. Let's start with alcohol and other drugs. If you want to say they're increasing in risk of death, you are correct, especially with the opiate epidemic, especially with fentanyl. The rate of suicide is sadly also increasing. If you want to say the rate of homicide is going up, very happily, you are quite wrong. Apparently, the homicide rate in this country peaked in the early 1990s. It is about half of what it was at that point currently. Skipping to cancer, it depends on how you phrase it. In cancer, the cases are going up substantially, not because cancer is becoming more common, but our population is aging and older people have a much higher risk of cancer. The rate of cancer is actually declining. So if you look at the number of hundreds of thousands of people who have cancer this year versus 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, you'll see that the rate of cancer is actually decreasing markedly. Also, the fatalities in part are going down because the cancer medications are much more effective than they were even 10 years ago, particularly for breast cancer. Heart disease is similar to that of cancer. Although the cases are going up substantially because our population is aging, if you look at people dying of it, the rate is actually declining. So overall, good news, I believe.
COVID, by the way, is still, this is 2024 when I'm narrating this, is still a top 10 cause of death in young adulthood and in children for that matter as well. The people that are dying are almost overwhelmingly unvaccinated. These individuals are also much more likely to suffer from long COVID. And the newest research is finding, for the adults anyway, they are much more likely to, for the first time, have autoimmune disease, which can definitely shape their life in a very unpleasant way. So again, please consider vaccination and perhaps discuss it with your primary healthcare provider.
Let's consider the brain in early or young adulthood. Similarly to what we've learned before, if a synapse is not used, it will be lost. Myelization continues and is now drawing to its completion. The changes that we mentioned in the prefrontal cortex before are continuing. As the cortex draws to its completion, it's better able to control the limbic system, so better control of emotionality, and many changes in higher thinking are partially associated with the finishing of our prefrontal cortex. Let's now take a look at cognition in young or early adulthood. There's a shift away from the dualistic thinking, a more simplistic thinking style of black and white, right and wrong. There would be a movement towards dialectical thought, in which various viewpoints, which are recognized as valid, are synthesized and combined. Probably your worldview is very much of dialectical thinking. Let's consider multiplicity. This is knowing that a problem can be solvable, but not necessarily at the particular moment. Relativistic thought is knowing that there are many true potential possibilities, that often there is no best answer, but some are often better than others. Because there is often no one best answer, there'll be uncertainty, termed commitment uncertainty, and that's okay, since there are many valid choices. For example, maybe you're choosing between a few different careers. Maybe you have more than one relationship option. It could be a big decision in life or a very small decision, but often there is no best answer. And we need to live with the idea that we need to make our decision and going on with the knowledge we have, making decisions and commitments. But it's also okay to change those decisions and to change those commitments. So for example, if you attended this college with one particular career path in mind, more likely than not, by the time you leave us, you will be on a different career path. Also with cognition, let's consider Piaget's formal operational thought, which includes abstract thinking. Do you remember what percent of individuals studied that are adults fully attain it versus the number that mostly attain it? It might have surprised you. According to research, a mere 10% of individuals in adulthood fully attain it, while 70% will mostly attain it. This is a harder slide, and I think you'll have to spend some more time reviewing it. But I'm sure that you are up to the task. Maybe just do one or two thought styles at a sitting and then build on it. That way you'll avoid confusion.
We noted that not everybody makes it into formal operational thought. Most people make it partially, we're talking Americans here, and the OECD nations, but most will make it into it partially, but a relatively small number will make it into it fully. Now, assuming the person does at least get partially into it, they might be capable of engaging in post-formal thought. What would that be? Well, realistic, dealing with not what the way they wish things are, but the way things are. So realistic, flexible, according to situations and so on. So flexible, logical, so not driven by emotions. Accepting that things are often highly complex and not simple. And even dialectical, where various viewpoints have to be and can be synthesized. So another feature of young adult thinking that would be typically not present in emerging adult thinking.